Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guest on this next interview. Could Ukraine's latest peace initiative mark a turning point in the war? President Zelensky has publicly proposed a ceasefire and direct talks with Vladimir Putin, positioning Kyiv as the side seeking a political path forward. Moscow rejected the offer, insisting any settlement must first address Russia's broader demands. Now, does that expose the Kremlin's true intentions, and can Europe play a larger role if diplomacy remains stalled? Joining us today on TVP World is Bohdan Nahaylo, editor-in-chief of the Kyiv Post. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good evening.
So, in regard to the latest letter published by Vladimir Zelensky, do you see this as an attempt to open negotiations with Russia, or do you think the main audience is actually directed towards Washington, Brussels, and the wider international community?
All of those that you have mentioned, but also to the Russian public and to the Russian elite, because let's remember that this letter comes just after drones hit St. Petersburg during the economic forum, which was a major embarrassment for Putin and his inner circle. So the message was, look, we refrain from hitting you on the Victory Day celebrations in Moscow. We could have done that. We are letting you know that we can strike at will now, not like a year or two ago when the West didn't want us to hit deep into Russia, but now that we're an independent actor producing our own long-range missiles and weapons, we can do this. And so I think that this, message from Zelensky can be read on several levels. A direct, shall we say, reminder to Putin and his inner circle, a reminder for Europe that let's stick together and we can work this out together at this stage. And also a reminder to the US, look, you've lagged behind, you've let us down very badly over the months now, but we know you've been preoccupied with Iran, but now is the time to either join us or say that you're forever on the sides. And I think there has been some success in the sense that both Rubio has said on behalf of the American administration that they're in the game again. Only 2 or 3 weeks ago, they were saying that they're out of negotiations. They can't deal with this anymore. Europe has to take charge. But now suddenly they're saying that they are backing Ukraine. And also, I think it's a very strong message for the Russian public and the Russian elite, economic, political, security agencies that, look, you're not winning this war. Even if there is a kind of standstill on the front, it's not going the way that you wanted and that your leader has promised you.
Now, looking at the actual content of the letter, when it comes to the wording, the phrasing, it's not exactly diplomatic. Do you think there's also an attempt at prodding for some sort of response from the Kremlin?
Look, Zelensky is an actor. He's a PR man, essentially. He's not a diplomat. And he has sidelined the foreign ministry, and he has taken matters into his own hands or the hands of his inner circle. And so this is not surprising. This is his way of doing things. And sometimes it backfires, but sometimes there are surprises that are effective. And I think right now the timing has been very effective because it exposes Putin's lack of will to discuss a ceasefire and any kind of settlement. And it has forced his spokespersons to lay down the law again that, you give us all of Donbass and you give us our terms, or we're not going to negotiate, and you come to Moscow if you want to talk. The same old rubbish that we've heard for a long time. But it sent a strong signal to the outside world, Europe in particular, but also very strongly to Washington, where Trump seems to be totally kind of bewildered by Iran, domestic issues, etc. And it's given a free rein to those in Congress who have pushed for greater support for Ukraine, and we've seen the vote in the last 2 or 3 days overruling Trump, where we've seen Republicans going over to the side of the Democrats and backing, giving Ukraine the support, the assistance that has been delayed for so long. So in that sense, it is a kind of turning point. It doesn't mean that Ukraine is winning the war, will win the war, but let's say it has stolen the initiative, and I think it's, shall we say, encouraged its supporters that Ukraine is not a losing cause, but it needs to be supported.
Right, now speaking of that reaction from Moscow and exposing the lack of will to negotiate, Volodymyr Zelensky himself also had this to say. We have a soundbite. Let's take a look.
Unfortunately, the Russian side has once again chosen war. Everyone heard Putin's response, a weak response. He simply doesn't want to end the war. I think many people around the world were disappointed by this. He doesn't want to change anything. He doesn't want to admit that his war pleases only him and those who are profiting from it. They were all pleased with what he said. That means there should be less money in Russia and more pressure on Russia.
Now, there's something that I'm hoping that you can help us unpack, because for months there have been a speculation, or at least some narratives, that Moscow might be looking for an off-ramp. Does Putin's rejection of Zelensky's proposal suggest that Russia still believes that it can achieve broader political objectives through force rather than through any sort of diplomatic negotiations?
Well, that's the message we've heard. Look, as I've said, Zelensky is an actor, he's a PR man, he's very unpredictable. And in this case, he's called Putin's bluff by exposing the fact yet again that Putin is not ready to negotiate. And Putin's not interested in some kind of deal halfway. It's all or nothing, a zero-sum game. And it's now, Putin's reputation at home, Putin's, shall we say, reputation in his inner circle, that's at stake. So Zelensky has very craftily taken the fight to Russia, not only with drones and long-range missiles, but through psychological pressure through this letter. And it's left, I would think, Putin in a very bad position. What are they saying? No, we're not ready. Let Zelensky come to Moscow. No, we don't want Europe involved. We would rather deal with via the US. And now suddenly the US is saying, no, we don't want to be an intermediary. The latest we see from Washington in the last day or two is, yes, we support bilateral talks between Kyiv and Moscow. The last thing that Putin wants. Putin may be more experienced and more sophisticated in terms of dealing and wheeling, but on the public scene, Zelensky steals the show from him.
Right now, you also mentioned, of course, European partners are trying to take part in the mediation as well. But do you think Europe can realistically become the principal peace broker? There's uncertainty, of course, involving long-term U.S. engagement. Do you think European leaders will be able to assume a larger mediation role, or there will be sort of a lack of leverage from the European side?
It all depends if they can get their act together. If they can agree first on a position, a joint position, and then jointly agree on who is going to be the spokesperson, representing Europe. Until we see that, it's hard for me to answer that question.
So if you were advising, let's say, European leaders today, would you tell them to invest more energy in building sort of new diplomatic framework, or focus first on altering the military balance on the ground before expecting any serious negotiations from Moscow?
I think it's a question of both, because the second aspect is longer term, but we need action right now. And I think that in Moscow, they are very worried that, shall we say, Trump and his team have stepped back and have publicly said this. and the ball is in many ways in Europe's court if they can get their act together, if they can find the right spokesperson. Now already Moscow is backing off, saying we don't want to deal with Europe because Europe are allies of Ukraine. We want a neutral party. So, you know, Ukraine is saying, well, let's say Switzerland, let's say Turkey, for example. But even that is frightening Moscow because it doesn't really want to deal at this stage.
Right, and you know, if Moscow doesn't want to deal with it, that means we're probably on the right track.
They have nothing to gain, they have everything to lose in going into such discussions.
Right, brilliant. Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.